Good morning, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so thrilled to have you all join us here for this Mental Health Action Partnership Summit, our second convening, large group convening of this group. And just really pleased to have you all able to be with us today and to join us in this work that we want to be about together. Again, my name is Kathy Markland. I'm the Executive Director of the Wisconsin Association of Family and Children's Agencies, WAFCA. I'm also part of the MHAP core group, and we'll talk more about that as we move through today and go through some pieces around how we're going to govern ourselves as MHAP going forward. So just a few guidelines as we get started, and many thanks to Sita and Julia who are helping to orchestrate things for us here today and keep the meeting moving well in this virtual environment. But this will be an interactive meeting. We're really hoping for that. For those of you that we had the pleasure of being with in October when we last gathered, I think that wonderful piece about being able to be in person and have those sidebar conversations. And we're hoping to create a little bit of that same energy here in the room today. So we really are looking to have you have your cameras on as much as possible and really have this be interactive and be asking for all of your learning and wisdom and insight as we move along. So when you have something to say, please feel free to unmute, give your name and organization before commenting. That's going to help to keep us all oriented. We had about 60 people respond to the invitation today, which is fantastic. And also it just means we might have kind of a full room. So make sure that when you are ready to talk that you unmute, give your name and organization before commenting. We also, of course, welcome you to write things in the chat. Sometimes that's an easier way to communicate in, and Julia and Sita are going to be monitoring that chat space as we go through to make sure that we're capturing all of your comments and questions there as well. Again, we know everyone is busy, and we appreciate that you've taken time to invest in MHAP today. We know it's a full thing to be on a meeting for a few hours via Zoom. And we will be taking breaks today, and I'll go through the agenda briefly. We know that some of you, because we have 3 hours together, may need to leave for part of the meeting, and others will be joining us later today. But we really hope for the benefit of group cohesion and to keep this partnership moving forward that you can be with us for as much of the morning as possible. And with that, I'm going to go through the agenda a little bit for you all and what you can expect from the agenda today. So we are going to kick off with a little bit of some discussion around the proposed MHAP structure. And talk to you and have some opportunity to talk to you about where we've been at with the MHAP so far. We want to reground everybody. Again, for those of you that were with us in October, we were able to provide for some context, and we'll be doing that, kind of reviewing that, and just to make sure we're all on the same page as we launch into the day today. Next, we'll have a little bit of discussion about our MHAP process. So we want to lay some groundwork around what governance and working together might look like, how we might break down the work a little bit. So I'll be leading us through a conversation on that, along with Michelle Broadus, will be joining us from the Medical College. And then we'll have a break at 10:15, and then Michelle will be back with us to talk a little bit about the AHW Behavioral Health Initiative. And I'm pleased that some of you that are joining us today are coming forward from those coalitions and bringing that rich experience and learning to this statewide effort. After that, around 10:50, we're going to move into policy priorities. We'll lay some groundwork and then go into some work groups. So we're going to give you the opportunity at that point to choose into some work group space where we'll have a chance to talk about what the initial work of the work groups might be, how we might formulate some initial thinking about collaborating together, and then come back into a whole group discussion for reporting out from those work groups. And then at 12:10, we'll move into a little bit of information, and you'll learn more about this on the calendar about some learning sessions that we're planning and hoping to get some input from you all about how we structure those learning sessions going forward. All right, so let me say a few words about MHAP and our purpose and vision here. So again, some of you had the opportunity to be with us in October. And again, it was a really super energizing meeting. And so we really welcome you to be back with us here today. And we're pleased also to welcome all those folks who are new to the fold here. So I'm really been asked here this morning to recenter us and on the why and the how and hopes of the partnership. So we recognize that true system change will require collective effort across an array of stakeholders. So really our gathering with all of you is to create a statewide coalition capable of substantially influencing ongoing mental health system improvement across the continuum of care. No small lift. Our vision is that MHAP will include diverse voices and will be accountable to people who need to be better served by the system. We will learn from each other and with each other. We will recognize current policies, programs, and practices that can be adapted and scaled up. So our vision really, and to really help to situate ourselves in some time frames of how we look at this work. It's not short-term work, it's long-term work. And again, those of you coming in from some of the AHW coalitions know this well. Those are long-term partnerships that you all have invested in. So our hope is that within a year from now, we want to be ready to recommend some low-hanging fruit system improvements where we can agree and where action can be taken without substantial funding or policy change. So really, we want to hit the ground running and find some opportunities for success together early on. Within the first 3 years, we're hoping to develop recommendations for changes that can be made through limited regulatory or funding reform and supported by an array of local and state level stakeholders. And then over the long term, we really do want to keep a vision on systems change and think about, are there recommendations that we collectively across a range of those with lived experience, those who are working as providers, those who are working out of local government and counties, how we all, as we touch this system as funders, as health insurers, really think about long-term system improvement and regulatory reform. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Sita to describe a little bit about the MHAP structure as we're envisioning it.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm just going to go over this, and I'll preface this by saying this is a starting point because we are forming. We're still in the forming stage of development. And so the governance work group that some of you will be in later on is really kind of in charge of bringing a full-fledged proposal to us. So we will consider that proposal in May. But we have this sort of provisional structure, so we've got something to work on as we start. So the large group, that's all of us, at this point we're calling it the partnership, and our meetings are called summits. We're aware that the governor has just, in the State of the State address, called for a mental health action plan, MHAP, so that's a little confusing. So our governor's group may suggest a slightly different name, we'll just see. But at this point, we're the big group, the partnership, and the meetings, the summit. So we're planning to meet 4 times a year in person in the warmer months because it's a lot better to meet in person, as you all know, and virtually when the weather is likely to make traveling difficult in Wisconsin. So there are advantages to virtual meetings, but there are also advantages to in-person meetings, and we plan to do both. We also plan to hold those in-person meetings in various locations of the state to make it easier. So not everybody has to schlep 6 hours from Superior as Superior does. Sometimes we'll hold it further north in the state or maybe down in the southeast. We'll just see how it goes. And let us know if your organization has a good meeting place for about 100 people in various parts of the state, because we'll work with you to host the MHAP meetings there. We anticipate that all major decisions are made collectively by the partnership, mostly at summits. We may make decisions by email, or we'll figure out some other fancy way to work. But we may make decisions in the interim between the quarterly meetings. But at this point, we anticipate that anything major that comes out of the work group or comes out of the core group will be decided on by the whole partnership. But as I'm mentioning the work groups, the real work gets done by the work groups. And so this is a very active commitment. You've all received a handout with a brief description of the workouts, and we're going to go over those later. I'm going to name them briefly now, and you'll have an opportunity to gather in one of these work groups during the last half of the meeting, just to get your feet on the ground. The idea in the breakout rooms today is that you meet each other, find out who you are, find out what you think you're about, and take a look at the charge, and then plan a first meeting and plan who's going to facilitate the early meetings going forward. So it's just a boots on the ground kind of gathering today. And there will be 5 groups to start with. More will undoubtedly emerge over time. And some of the groups that we are proposing now are big buckets. So they may decide to split into smaller groups. But this is just the starting point for today. So there are 2 policy priority work groups, and these are externally facing. We're looking at the Wisconsin system. We're addressing things where there is agreement that change needs to happen. So the first of those is the workforce work group, and it'll focus on addressing the mental health provider shortage, increasing access to culturally and linguistically appropriate services, and on making sure that everybody is trained up and doing evidence-based practice. The second work group is the Medicaid work group, and it'll focus on reimbursement rates, reimbursement strategies, regulations, streamlining regulations and billing requirements so that providers can spend more of their time giving care rather than dealing with documentation. Those are both huge buckets. And as I said, those work groups may decide to split to address actionable specific issues. Or we may form new work groups to look at issues like financing and regulatory reform or service coordination. So this is, as I said, just a starting point. And then there are 3 internally focused operational work groups. The first is governance. And so this is how we govern ourselves. And when Dr. Brada speaks about coalition work, this is kind of grist for the mill for the governance work group, because you'll be deciding how we make decisions, how we structure ourselves, how we move forward. And then the second is a diversity and equity and inclusion work group. And this is really important because if we're going to make change, the change needs to serve the people who are least well served by the system at this point. And so we're going to reach out to voices that need to be at this table. And we would love to have your recommendations for people who represent an underserved population and can articulate the needs of people in their position or people like them. And we want to ensure this work group will ensure that diverse perspectives are fully considered in the work of the partnership, so that all voices are raised, that we hear all voices, that we are thoughtful about incorporating the perspectives into our work. And then the data work group will look at existing data and gaps in data, and will work to get the analyses that we will need as the Mental Health Action Partnership to inform our work. And then lastly, so those are the operational work groups. And then there's another group within all of these groups, and that's the core group. And it basically serves as the executive committee. It meets every other week. So that's quite a commitment. At 8 o'clock on Monday morning, another commitment. And we keep our work going between meetings. But the idea behind the core group is it's not leadership, it's kind of keeping all of the plates spinning, everything coordinated, and ensuring that we're moving forward toward our vision. The governance work group will bring forward a proposal for the core group process and composition at our in-person meeting, which will be in May, somewhere in Wisconsin. And then finally, knowing that we have a lot to learn from each other and to inform our work together, we'll host regular MHAP learning sessions. on the months when there's no summit. We know that you all are busy and we don't want to eat your schedules. And so, but we would like to host these on a regular basis. They will be on Friday afternoons, either the second or third Friday of the month, just to close out your of the week, to close out your week on a high note. We had one in December. It was fantastic. We've got a couple more planned that we'll talk about later. And we want to have those regular learning sessions, but we want you to help us think about what we need to learn. And then we will arrange people in our partnership who are experts. We have a lot of experts here, and then also outside experts to help us learn. Those learning sessions are very interactive, so we'll talk about those later. Just as this meeting is today, we want you to, be engaged and tell us what you think and help us move forward. So this is a good segue to Julia Polk from NAMI, Wisconsin, who's going to review our proposed MHAP calendar for this year. Julia.
Good morning, everyone. So as you see, this is the tentative calendar for this year for the summits and the learning sessions. And we would really love if you all could look at this and think about it in relation to other big events such as conferences, things like that that are important to your organizations and other members of MHAP. Because we'd love to know if anything conflicts with these and there's, any reason why it would be a bad date for everyone, or for a large group of people. So if you know of any conflict, please email me or Sita. I'll put our emails in the chat, and just let us know about that. And we'll also be sending out this calendar so you can look at it more closely, and kind of compare it to your calendar. But the general kind of cadence here, like Sita said, we're going to have the 4 MHAP summits. The kind of winter ones are going to be virtual, and then the spring and fall ones are going to be in person. And then typically 1 learning session a month. And then nothing in July. We all get some time off then and get a nice break in the middle of the summer. So yeah, does anyone have any kind of questions or comments at this point about the calendar or about the general structure that Sita just went over?
Any thoughts about the MHAP structure, about our vision and our goals? The word lofty has been heaved at us a lot of times, and that's true. It is lofty, but we've got to aim high if we're going to get anywhere. And there's a lot of good work happening in Wisconsin. We need to recognize that good work and incorporate it into what we all do as much as possible. Other thoughts about MHAP, the vision, the structure?
The one thing I'd like to say, Seeing Kathy, is I think it'd be important to collaborate and maybe someone present to the Council on Mental Health Legislative Policy Committee that some of you are parts of, just so people are kind of on the same page and working together.
Really good point. Because the Council on Mental Health, as many of you may know, informs the Department of Health Services. We're going to talk about our relationship with the Department of Health Services going forward. And it's specifically like the legislative mandate, I believe, is to inform or is to be the stakeholder group behind the mental health block grant and the substance use SCOD with the substance use block grant. But it has a broader mission to be a stakeholder group. Good point, Mark. Thank you. Anything else?
Yes. You may also want to try for the Medicaid policy. You may want to try to also focus on the federal level. I know it's mostly state level, but because Medicaid is partly funded by the federal level.
Right. I just spotlighted myself, so I'm going to try and remove that. Sorry. Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Other thoughts, everybody?
Never really got a full grasp how to run her own life.
Okay, I have to go to this meeting. I don't know.
Anybody else with thoughts about MHAP and our structure, where we're going and who we need to inform and who we need to reach out to?
And
Okay.
just so you all know too, we'll be spending more time diving into this a little bit more deeply yet this morning. So it's not this is just some opportunity for some preliminary thoughts from you all. But we will be talking more about how we relate to one another, obviously, and then how we relate to other organizations and the systems that are out there with our state administration, policymakers, et cetera.
Okay, so with that, Kathy, talk about the MHAP process that we have envisioned so far. And Bryn, please pull up the slide. Oh, well, go ahead. Yeah.
All right, so we're moving into a discussion about really more deeply about the governance structure this morning. We'd like to start actually thinking about the work groups, which may seem a little inverted, but since we are going to break it into work groups today, we really did want to start out with a talk about how the work groups can function relative to a broader body. And so many of you are relating to groups that have sort of subgroups within them. We're looking to bring forward your kind of wisdom into our thinking about how we keep the work moving forward, but also keeping the communication channel running. So we've laid out some proposed processes this morning, but we know that this is going to evolve over time. And we want to ensure that we're incorporating your perspectives as the MHAP moves forward. So for the work group, we've kind of proposed some broad guidelines here, right, that CETA laid out for us. But we're looking to members of each of the groups where you kind of decide to align to develop those work group goals, to set out some logic models for where you see that work progressing to, set out some timelines and some deliverables. Then the job of the core group, as CETA identified it, that group that meets every 2 weeks, is just to stay in touch, to make sure, and I like the vision of all of the plates spinning, right? Keep things going. And then but the work groups ultimately will function as they think best. So in terms of getting and making a progression around the frequency and cadence of meetings, whether you break into smaller subgroups, that will be determined to a degree by the work groups. But major questions, decisions, and recommendations, as we have it envisioned and are proposing it at this point, would be discussed by the partnership as a whole at either a summit or exchanged, as CETA said, via email or another sharing tool that we may identify along the way. But the question we have before you that we wanted to present for some discussion in large group here today is, as we set up work groups, how can we do that so that they function nimbly while still coordinating with the partnership as a whole? We're interested in your kind of initial thoughts about how work groups, things that you may have experienced yourself from already being within kind of any kind of structures where there's a need to have a broader array of people stay informed of information as things are continuing to progress within a smaller group. How do we allow those work groups to be nimble while coordinating with the whole partnership?
So go ahead, everybody. This is your moment to think about this. Well, what will help us stay both nimble and coordinated? Go ahead.
I guess I'll start just to get
Great.
the ball rolling here.
Yeah.
Kit Kirsten-Snyder, Disability Rights Wisconsin. Nimbleness to me is a function of horsepower, and horsepower means people that are committed and have made a certain commitment to the group. And I know I've been on groups where I haven't been able to make a commitment, and I've listened and been interested, but then it's like, no, I don't have the time to draft that or go there or whatever. So I think it's being clear with people what the buy-in is going to be, and make sure that people are committed to doing that, because I think you can go pretty fast when you go together but everyone's putting an oar in the water. And I know that's hard. I break my own rule a lot, but it's what you should be aiming for. I guess that's my piece of it. And from there, coordination if people are committed and someone's committed to being the point person to something, to to be the spoke to the hub, then I think, you can work on that. But that's my thought to start things off.
And
I love that, Kit. Oh, hey, Mark.
Hi, just want this is Mark Kirsten, National Association of Social Workers. Just take it one step further, very simple. To have the chairperson of the work group after each meeting send a quick email to the partnership group or one of the key people in the partnership group, just to keep them informed. So that's what I would suggest, that each chairperson email the maybe either Cedar Kathy or somebody else, just to let them know what's going on.
Yeah, and I think one of the things where I've seen this done well too, I think, and if any of our county partners are on, with the way that the PAC system works with WIXA and the key messaging documents that they put out, I do think that, again, summarizing it down so that there's a way to get to those quick salient points that are easy to share across groups. So I really appreciate that, Mark. And also, to be able to quickly kind of synthesize that down into what are the pieces that people need to be kept apprised of, and so they don't have to kind of sort through a volume of a transcript from a meeting, but can get to the key messages. Other thoughts?
Well, I'm seeing really, go ahead, Lynette. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think too, having some sort of digital repository, either using Dropbox or Google Drive or something like that, where each group would have a folder, have I think it's really important to have an agenda for every meeting, and then to have meeting notes. I like the idea of having a top level summary for each work group to coordinate with other work groups. But I think people can't always make every meeting, but are still going to want to be involved. If there's an agenda item, that someone is particularly interested or wants to give input on, maybe they clear their schedule for that meeting. So I think some sort of digital repository of our work shared that we all have access to is really important.
I love that there's great sharing happening in the chat also around this. And thank you for that, Annette. We've had some conversations in the core group about how we set up some shared space for exchange of documentation. And I think that will be really important. And I think among our core group members, we're probably looking for some bright thinking from our membership here around the best tools to adopt for that. And to make sure that they're kind of more universally accessible, whether it is Dropbox or Google Drive. Certainly looking for all of your input on where you've been involved in things where that's gone smoothly and you've had a good experience with those tools online. I'm looking at some of the other pieces from the chat.
Yeah, Courtney is saying from the Free and Charitable Clinics. Courtney, would you like to talk about your idea, the point leaders for each work group meeting together?
Yeah, I guess Mark kind of talked about this already, similar to his concepts. Another consortium that we're a part of is a mental health consortium based out of Milwaukee area. And they really focus on having like leaders of each work group and subgroup and having those leadership meetings where they can all inform each other and continue that group work. So I guess similar to what the core group would be doing, would be like the leadership of each work group type situation is what we've experienced in that other consortium. It does work really well, but like some other people have said, it is a lot of meetings to attend for those who want to be chairs of each work group. So it's just another thing to commit to, just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've talked about a lot, there's a piece on this communication space of, sharing things. We can share things out in writing, but there is, it's hard to get past the value of being able to convene with the group to sort of have some conversation, because we know that part of good coalition building and collective working together is relationship building at the base of it. And so we need to be present to each other. Even in virtual space like this is really helpful, I think, to start to build some of that trust and collective factor. And so as much as we want to be able to spread the work, we also need to, make it that commitment. And I think going back to Kit's initial part, right? Like that part of this is that giving of your time and being present to the convenings. And we know that that's, to make that as valuable as possible for everyone, and to really see some product. I see Leah's hand up.
Hello, I'm Leah Jepson. I'm from one of the ABHI initiatives in Milwaukee. And we are actually in a similar position in the Milwaukee County area, trying to figure out how to do this work, maintain agility or nimbleness and communication without certain people having to go to all of the meetings, right? So the point is that you have the collective group for the kind of report out quarterly or however we want this to work, right? But then the accountability factor is so huge. And so we're looking at having, and the way that we worked our coalition from early on is we modeled ours after the Office of Children's Mental Health, where we actually had 2 co-leads for each of our work groups. One was a person who, and you might all have heard this before, but I preach this. One is a person with like learned experience, so an academic or a clinician. Another is a person with lived experience. And so you have people who are from, along that both continuums, right? But then there needs to be this like major level of accountability, expectations, roles delineated. Otherwise, it ends up just being a whole lot of meetings and not a lot of action. And so, so while I don't have an answer, we're looking at different tools right now, because we know for us, emails don't work. Emails get lost in the shuffle. And then also it really is helpful to be able to have a place for it all to live, where you can easily go and see what bullet points are that each of the work groups are currently working on. And then also not to put too fine a point on it, but also have a way of calling out people from other groups, like even if you have a shared drive where you can put in at so-and-so, so they get a message that they're needed to respond to something. So just like, so that it doesn't get bogged down, right? And it sounds like a lot of work, but it's actually, in the long run, it makes it a lot more smooth, and it really helps with communication.
Thank you, Leah, for sharing that. And this is one of the reasons why we were thrilled to be able to build this kind of network into all the learning that's been happening through the local coalitions, because we knew that there was going to be rich resource to bring forward into thinking about how we take this into a statewide initiative. So I think that's all very helpful for how we think about structuring things going forward. I'm seeing that a couple of platforms dropping in as possible tools for us to use, which is great. And maybe we need to have a committee on communication that actually helps us work through sorting some of this. Other thoughts that people have here out the gate?
There was a question about sharing contact information with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that can get unwieldy too, and we want to be respectful of boundaries. So we will share a list of who is in MHAP, who has participated so far, but we'll try and figure out some way where we'll have a commons where we can communicate without, by sharing the information that people want shared and not sharing information that people don't want shared. So that's part of the consensus building process to go forward. And then I'm seeing that Kit is saying part of the agenda have a clear delineation of expected asks and goals to be achieved at the meeting, not just topics to be covered. So action oriented, that's why we've got action in our name. And at this point, Julia and I, particularly, I have a kind of a coordinator role. So I'll be attending as many of these work groups as possible and kind of trying to serve as a thread between the work groups.
Yes, and we're really grateful that NAMI has some resource and has to support kind of being the glue for those of you that have been going through or in the midst of successful coalition work or collaborations. You know the importance of having people who have designated time to be convener. And NAMI has really stepped into that and stepped up for that for us with some funding they've been able to derive to help us lay the groundwork here and moving forward. But it will be a question, and we'll be diving a little bit into that too as we move forward through our discussion today about how we sustain some of that moving forward once we kind of get the foundation laid together. I think I will move us on to a little bit deeper discussion around the governance piece. So as we noted, I'm sorry, Mai, do you want to jump in? No. Okay. It's a little tricky with the mutes, unmutes. So once we'll have this rich work group structure that's going to be feeding up into our broader MHAP grouping. But we really want to be thinking about what our decision-making process is collectively and know that everybody has voice and an opportunity to be invested in what it is that we're identifying as our priority initiatives, our priority work together collectively. So we also want to recognize that everybody's going to continue to have their own individual priorities that they will be moving forward on at the same time. So with that said, we're interested in having a little bit of a conversation around and do some joint thinking this morning around what does collective decision making look like. We want to be in a position where we are moving in a direction that has generalized buy-in, that is a consensus-based process. But we also want to make sure that we're creating space, at all times for, a dissenting voice, because that can be a really important guide for us. So if one or more of us feels that strongly that sort of a decision or direction is wrong, we know that we want to have a process that allows us to consider that perspective and find a way that that addresses that's attending to those perspectives. So again, so many of you are coming to us from groups that have been doing this coalition work in a very rich way, and there are various models for us to how to get to yes. That we may have all experienced within our own work settings, within our own communities, and within our own coalition building. So we've asked Michelle Broaddus, Dr. Michelle Broaddus from the Medical College of Wisconsin, who's going to be also sharing some more with us later this morning, but we've asked her to just kind of start out by laying some groundwork for us around shared decision-making. So a little bit about Dr. Broaddus, which we're so excited to have her engaged with this work. She's the principal investigator of the Advancing Behavioral Health Initiative, ABHI, which has been working with local behavioral health coalitions around the state for several years. So Dr. Broaddus, I'm so glad to have you with us today. Please tell us what ABHI has learned about effective coalition decision-making.
Kathy, I'm excited to see everybody and see some familiar faces. Just a little bit about who I am. As mentioned, I'm at the Medical College of Wisconsin. I'm an associate professor in the psychiatry and behavioral medicine department, but I am not a psychiatrist. I am not a clinician. I am a researcher. And I have been extremely privileged to be part of the Advancing Behavioral Health Initiative. I want to say I'm going to be presenting some information to you now about coalitions, and then a little bit after the break in terms of also the ABHI itself. So it might seem a little bit out of order, but I wanted to first give a shout out to my ABHI family, including Leah Jepson and Aaron, I think is on, and Aaron Ruff and Christy Johnson and I think I'm forgetting somebody. My point is, these folks that I've been working with are the real experts. You know how they say those who can't do, teach. So I haven't done this work. I've been lucky to work with people who know how to do this work. That's why I'm super excited to see some of my colleagues here today. I am going to share my screen to do some slides here. Right. So just to give a little bit of background, so we've talked about the ABHI, a little bit of a sneak peek. I'm going to get more into this after the break, but this is an initiative that was funded by the HW Endowment. And it was a very unique funding structure. First of all, we got 8 years to do this project because AHW realized if they wanted to move from grant maker to change maker, as is sort of their tagline these days, they needed to do something besides, they need to do additional things, on top of funding individual projects. So we had an entire, so they funded 10 community coalitions all across the state, very diverse, urban, rural, all corners of the state, as well as one academic partner team from the medical college, which I was leading. So we had an entire year in phase 1 where we created a learning community with learning sessions every month. People were trekking back and forth to either Milwaukee or Wisconsin every month to do this important work. We learned a lot because these coalitions were not selected for funding based on a project idea. It was based on the strength of the coalition they'd had managed to begin the process of building. And then as part of that process, they came up with strategies. We call them strategies, not programs, not interventions, because it was really focused on systems level change. And then we are coming close to the end of our grant, which makes a lot of us feel a lot of things. We're excited about all the great work we've done, as well as for me personally, really wanting to make sure that the work that has been done, the relationships that have been built, have really don't fizzle. You know, sometimes when projects end and things can fizzle out, we really want these relations. I really would like to sustain these amazing relationships among the folks that I've been so lucky to work with. So when CETA reached out to me to collaborate on this, I jumped at the opportunity to further those relationships and get at that more statewide level. So just really quickly, like I said, there are 10 different community coalitions all across the state. I won't go into this too much, but you can see again the diversity of geography. And I want to talk a little bit, so CETA, well, the MHAP core group asked me to talk a little bit about, in this section, about coalitions. And what I will say is what I say whenever I am asked about this project is that each coalition is unique and different. So sometimes it's hard to say that there are any hard and fast rules to what makes a successful coalition. But I did notice that there are some themes about the structure. So some had a steering committee and then created work groups each coalition had at least 2, sometimes up to 4 strategies. And then there was built-in accountability, as Leah was talking about, where the work groups were accountable to the steering committee. The co-chairs of work groups were on the steering committee. And then there was an advisory committee. And also you can think about the language we use. We want to use advisory committee versus steering committee, which may have to do with sort of the values that MHAP has. In other places, there were work groups that were not necessarily aligned by strategy. For example, there was a very large coalition in the south west of the state that focused more on county level connections rather than strategy level. There were a few coalitions that had a sort of a workhorse work group that was really responsible for getting the work done and pushing things forward. Those tended to be strategies that were maybe a little bit more contained. Things like being in schools, having sort of a container rather than a community-wide. But they still use subcommittees and ad hoc groups. And I should say some of these coalitions were created specifically for this project. Other coalitions had been had already been established for some time. So again, each of the coalitions was different in terms of their timeline and process and how they ended up structuring themselves, depending on the local context and the local values, I'd say. Along with that, I've noticed what I've called a continuum of structural formality. And I think with a group such as this, that's the MHAP group that is this big, thinking about moving towards that more structured and formal processes might be handy, since there are just so many great people involved and have so many great things to share. But there are coalitions that have formal bylaws, board of directors. Some have formal agendas and a charter and a mission or vision. And some, at least especially when starting out, are more non-traditional, with a specific focus on wanting to get rid of hierarchies and approach things from a grassroots way. So this sort of structural continuum is loosely correlated with how old or mature the coalition itself is. Some were based on voting versus consensus. A lot of coalitions really wanted to make decisions by consensus as much as possible. And it had to be really thoughtful about, when we can't come to a consensus, how do we still make decisions? But the structural formality doesn't have anything to do with whether you're an urban or a rural type organization. It's not related to that at all. But I will say, I think there's been a lot of time thinking about governance, because it's going to set such a strong foundation for us to get our work done. There are lots of tools and processes that the individual coalitions have created. Most have done mission vision statements, really defined roles and responsibilities, timelines, formal and pre-structured agendas. So some coalitions, instead of coming up with a new agenda for each meeting beforehand and then sending it out, there's sort of a pre-understood, this is what we're going to be talking about at these meetings, so people can sort of know what they're going to be asked to contribute to beforehand. One thing I will say, people come and go. And one thing we've learned is, when people jump into processes in the middle, they can be a steep learning curve. And so there's a need for active onboarding for new members. And a lot of our coalitions in the AMHI did have a specific subcommittee specifically for developing structure and governance. So I think this is an important discussion to have, and it's well worth the time. I'm going to give 2 case studies. One is sort of, I think, maybe the most sort of structured and formalized coalition. So the coalition that was funded under the ABHI is called Healthy Teen Minds, but it is actually under the umbrella of a much larger coalition, New Mental Health Connection, which stands for Northeast Wisconsin Mental Health Coalition. And they have a membership structure. This is something that they decided was necessary in order to build in accountability. So membership is open to individuals and organizations. And depending on if you are coming to this coalition as an organization or individual, depending on the size of your organization, depends on membership fees. But also people with lived experience can become part of the coalition, and there are plenty of scholarship opportunities. So people who don't have that sort of organizational backing or budget can still participate in the coalition. And being a member of this coalition allows for lots of opportunities for collaboration, revolutionary systems level solutions, which I love the word revolutionary, which can mean a lot of different things, but basically means when you want things to change, you might have to think about why we need to change it. I want to point out that this coalition has been in existence for 10 years, doing an absolutely amazing amount of work. I encourage you to go to their website, and there you'll find a lot of information about their different projects, including a 10-year report of their 10 years. I'm going to switch now to somewhat of a different coalition that I feel like is less structured, but still extremely impactful. And this is Leah's coalition, Leah Jepson. This is the Milwaukee Coalition for Children's Mental Health. And I don't want to speak for Leah, but Leah faced a challenge in terms of there being sort of an environment or a history in Milwaukee of grants and coalitions that come and go. And Leah really wanted to make sure that this one was unique and stood out in terms of the sea of coalitions and organizations that all do great work in Milwaukee. So I want to sort of highlight their values. They did a lot of work specifically because they wanted to explicitly delineate what their values were, including empathy, equity, parents and families in Milwaukee with unique experiences, the diversity of the community, and really a commitment to respecting those experiences and all the skills that folks in the community have. They attracted what they call context experts. Although, Leon, you may have changed it from, I loved what you said earlier, those with learned experience and those with lived experience, I think is great, kind of shorthand. But they were able to really empower members of their community by recruiting from a cross section of folks. And I say I want to point out that many of their members have now sort of, because of their work in the coalition, have built their skills, have built their capacity, and they moved on to other opportunities, stepping up their own advocacy work, becoming family navigators. So you can see that this is sort of a coalition like this that can create future leaders as well. And one thing that was the biggest theme that came out, at least what I've heard, is moving at the speed of trust, especially when you're working with folks who may not be used to the sort of professional roles that the folks in this room may have. You can't rush work that depends on authentic relationships. As I said, sometimes in Milwaukee, previous initiatives want to jump right to implementation without doing the trust building that's needed. Engaging with those that are the actual experts in their needs and solutions. How organizations can best collaborate. And they ended up having to really slow down their implementation timeline, which luckily our funder was on board with because they understood the need for that. And you can find some more information about their coalition on the website there. Leah, what would you like to add?
I think if we're talking about it from the context of, and I shared a couple of things in our in the chat. One is where we got content and context experts from. We usually use those terms rather than lived and learned experience, but they're interchangeable. I interchange them. What we really figured out is that with our coalition, there had never been a children's mental health coalition in Milwaukee, or a coalition or task force that focused specifically on the unique mental health needs of children. But there are a lot of other coalitions or initiatives in Milwaukee doing overlapping work. And we are still working on breaking down some of those silos and improving communication amongst ourselves and really building those relationships. But I think early on, the most important thing that we did, because we wanted very much to engage people with lived experience or the context experts, that we wanted to change how we have meetings entirely, and to make it just a lot less formal, to make it more welcoming, to have people get to know each other on a personal level as opposed to a professional level. Because as one of my colleagues said, you know, not all of us have a bunch of letters after our names, right? And so we instituted, we brought in someone from Ubuntu Research and Evaluation, which is a Black woman-led evaluation organization in Milwaukee, who and they really helped us as a coalition work through differences and really understanding as professionals how we show up at tables versus if we would be going to like a community meeting. And so we instituted things, you know, we did a lot of like bias work. We really put a lot open on the table. We made sure that there were safe people for everyone. So if someone was triggered or upset by something, they could text somebody else in the meeting. We borrowed from one of our folks, one of our colleagues in another coalition, what we call the acro knock, which is whenever anybody uses jargon or an acronym, somebody else knocks on the table to remind them to say what it is, so people know what we're talking about, because we tend to speak in code, things like that. And then we also co-developed a series of agreements that we covered at the beginning of every meeting, and just how we want to see people show up in the space. And I'm happy to share those. We also adapted them for virtual meetings too. And so those are just some of the things that we learned as we were going through it, because we really wanted to make sure that the people who were, you know, as we're looking at disparities in who gets diagnosed, who gets services in Milwaukee, it's usually children of color, children in poverty, and children with coexisting special education needs that really lose out and end up spending a lot of time out of the classroom and don't get that early intervention. And so we wanted to hear from parents what they were dealing with, so we knew where to focus our energy. And you can't do that if you can't build relationships. So so we had a lot of fun. We haven't had a meeting in quite some time, but we are looking to we're working really hard on a kind of a larger initiative around bringing every one of those groups that overlaps with children's mental health, because we know children's mental health doesn't happen in a vacuum. So people are working on workforce mental health, like early childhood stuff, parent, caregiver mental health, classroom teachers, and all of that, so that we can come together with like a shared vision of how we want our Milwaukee folks to be, how healthy, and so that we're all kind of working at least towards an agreed upon North Star. And that is a lot of work. But we're hoping we can really keep this going after our funding runs out. You know, we have a hard stop over the summer after 8 years of doing this, but we've made so much progress. And really, I think we've really changed how people look at community engagement in Milwaukee in a lot of ways. So that's my 2 cents. I don't know if there are time for questions or anything. Michelle?
There's a few more
Yeah.
slides to get through, and Kathy has a few things to say as well. So thank you so much, Leah. Like I said, these folks are the real experts, and I really appreciate you being here. I'm just going to sum up really quickly. I love this quote. Work in a space where everyone is unhappy and no one owns the whole thing. I think we've covered this in terms of there needs to be time for exploration. We all know there are others doing this work, and there's no need for any of us to isolate or silo. Bringing your whole self. I think people really respond to that. If we talk about relationship building and how important that is. And this is my new like slogan for everything I do now. Relationships are an outcome. And you can think about that in a lot of different ways. There are plenty of examples where having the structure of these coalitions locally meant a lot of collateral benefits. People that hadn't met before were like, oh, hey, you're the one that does that. I never met you before. Let's exchange information. There have been new grant opportunities that have come out because of relationships built by the coalitions. And there's no way to predict any of that. But if you take the time to build a solid foundation, there can be sustainable things that are sustained over the lifetime as long as you do the work to make those sort of durable communication channels as well. So just again, overall, coalitions change and adapt over time as well. A lot of folks tried things at the beginning, didn't work, tried new things. Those didn't work, tried new things. And that doesn't represent a failure. That represents the ability to adapt to the unique context of the folks you're working with and what you're trying to accomplish. Bringing diversity requires being very intentional and authentic. And I think what I've learned is that coalitions that have solid but flexible processes are more likely to accomplish their goals. And I think that's all I'll share for right now. Thank you so much for the time to share a little bit more with you about the ABHI. And like I said, there will be more time for you to ask Leah and my colleagues questions in a little bit.
And you can bet there will be questions. That was super rich, Michelle. So thank you so much for laying that groundwork. And we're just super excited to have the energy and the that learning that you all have from your ABHI initiatives into this group, bringing really important information and helping us to hit the ground running a little bit more here. So I think we want to pivot at this point to talk a little bit about how, and some of you are predicting our direction here in the chat. I'm seeing some questions around how do we think about how this relates to how we relate as an MHAP to government and to policymakers and decision makers and structures. And so all of this ground laying at this moment, we really hope to feed into the governance work group to really say, we're going to hope that work group can give us some structure and think about these elements of how we're going to get to shared decision making, and then let's talk about how we relate to government. So we'd like to get a little head start here, though, in the next few minutes before we take a break. And so we recognize that we're all kind of independent. We're independent, stakeholder-led group. And I actually want to flesh that out a little bit more. There's some intentionality when we think about how we pulled together the partnership, the Mental Health Action Partnership, that at its initial stage, its foundational stage here, where we are all standing right now, we did not want this to be a group that was dependent on or driven by or connected to a state agency of any kind. And that was very intentional, not because there isn't deep and important and critical knowledge and information and resources to be brought to bear from our state partners in all of this work. But we wanted to lay a foundation for a group that would have a structure that allowed it to transcend any given state administration, that would really have some longevity to it. So we are keeping the Department of Health Services and all of our partners there, and just as really appreciate Mark calling out early on about how we might relate to the Wisconsin Council on Mental Health and their Legend Policy Committee. So we're certainly very invested in keeping everyone apprised of the MHAP's work. And there will be times when it's going to be really important for us in our learning sessions and other spaces to invite public officials to our meetings and to meet with them on behalf of MHAP. So we'd like your thoughts on these questions, though. We've sort of posed a few questions that in this 15 minutes we'd like to do some shared thinking around again and laying some of this groundwork for our governance group as they break out later. So the first question is, what should we keep in mind when we interact with public policy authorities on behalf of the MHAP? So what do we think about and what do we know about from coalition-based work, how you represent the work of a collective versus the work of your own organization or your own personal voice? What ground rules should we have for speaking on behalf of the MHAP? And how can we establish a process that is resilient enough to keep advancing our goals regardless of leadership and political changes? So again, this question really speaking to, we want organizationally to be the kind of be a force for change regardless, and to transcend whoever might be sitting in those decision-making chairs, whether legislatively or on the state administration side, but that we're able to continue to carry that torch forward. So those are the questions, and I think I'm going to let you all ponder them. They're before you on the slide. We're looking for just some of your initial thoughts on this. And again, I feel like some of you are already just ready to jump in with these questions. The questions have now been put in the chat so that we can take the slide down and engage in a little bit of dialogue. And you can all see those questions in the chat that we're going to keep reference in this conversation. So inviting you forward, Mark, hand up, jump in.
Thanks, Kathy. So with my experience with coalitions, if you're going to speak on behalf of the coalition, you need to have pretty much everybody agreeing to specific items. And so I think the different groups that you're talking about, I'm particularly interested in workforce and also possibly the Medicaid group, but these groups will probably come up over time with some specific potentially legislative proposals, initiatives, funding kind of stuff, and you could bring that to a general meeting of this summit meeting and get consensus behind them. And then once you have an agreement on specific policy initiatives, then the coalition itself could speak on some of the leaders of the coalition could speak on behalf of the coalition. Coalition you might get stationery that lists all the members of the coalition if people are comfortable with that. But I think you have to have some kind of formal process, and maybe at these summit meetings where there's agreement that these initiatives we do support. If there are initiatives that not everybody supports, then obviously the coalition can't say the coalition supports it, and maybe individual members will work with each other on that. So that's kind of my suggestion on this.
Jessica.
Hi, everybody. Jess Smith with the Center for Inclusive Transition Education Employment, she, her pronouns. Speaking to the last question, I think it will align nicely with some prior discussion around ensuring that we have a diversity of perspectives in the coalition throughout the work, so that we're hearing from the different voices, we're hearing different ideas, strategy, political viewpoints, and people really speaking from, like the context experts and content experts, so that we can carry forward whatever the particular objective is. Being clear in, I want to say it, knowing the end goal, but being flexible in how we get there will likely be key. So having that maybe value-driven outcome, so that we can recognize that there may be differences in how government is involved, I think will be critical. And the other, I think, goes back to the communication. we could use some really savvy folks that can speak the language of different parties and leaders and think about reframing based on who's making the decision, and finding wins, ideally bipartisan from the beginning, but if nothing else, being able to lean more heavily into maybe workforce development language in more conservative times, and public support, just very broadly speaking, in a little bit more progressive times. So
grateful for some of those practicalities too, Jess. Both elevated and practical. That's wonderful. I'm going to kick it over to Kit. She's got her hand up.
Yeah. Most of us here, just looking at the little captions, I think most of us here represent organizations. And as an organization, I know we have a set of priorities. We have things that we are going to promote and things we are not so interested in promoting, and things we downright would oppose, and all shades in between. So I think it needs to be really clear, having been in other organizations where this is other coalitions which are made up of organizations. What happens? We may get consensus around an issue, but consensus is not unanimity. So we need to, my allegiance primarily is to my organization. And if we have a priority to support this or hang back or whatever on the continuum, what's the expectation? So if you're having things like letterhead and all the organizations listed on there, well, wait a minute. You sent out a letter saying we strongly support XYZ, and my organization is there, and my organization didn't strongly support XYZ. And now I go in to see Mr. Legislator or Ms. Legislator and say, no, I just think that's confusing for us. That's confusing for them. What do we do? And it's difficult. I don't think there's, an off the rack solution. I think it's hard, but I think the expectation is to be clear what people are signing on to for their organization and how it's going to be handled when you're the loyal opposition on something.
So I love again, thank you, Kit, that's the reality, right? That's rubber hitting the road. And I've got 3 people in the queue to talk, and I know we have until 10:15, but I'm going to kick it over to Mai to jump in, and hope all of you who have hands raised too are interested in joining the governance work group discussion when we go to breakouts.
Thank you. In addition to, Kid and I forgot, is it Michelle, the last speaker, echoing what they're saying. In addition to that, I also want to say, for me, joining this group is really an honor and a privilege, but at the same time, it would be frustrating if things go as, the 2 previous speakers, are mentioning. And also if the voiceless, the underserved communities are not in the agenda in the work that we do, then it would be really not useful of our time, because we have limited time, limited resources, and being here is an honor and privilege, but also want to make sure that it's meaningful for the underserved population, because mental health for us doesn't mean just the treatment. It means outreach, it means communication, training, so they understand the Western treatment system, so they understand the individual, not a wraparound style for them where they can get everything, like they come here for service and they get everything. It's not like that. So there's a lot of outreach, a lot of education, a lot of all that before we can get to the treatment. So I just want to make that point out, that it's important for underserved communities to get culturally competent, linguistically services, including training and outreach before we get to treatment.
So grateful for that, Mai. Thank you so much for bringing that forward. Bridget?
Thank you. I'm Bridget Munson. I'm the executive director at NAMI Racine County. NAMI, in relation to the question that Sita asked, what ground rules should we have for speaking on behalf of MHAP? NAMI has a one-pager essentially outlining how your language choices matter. For example, instead of saying this person is schizophrenic, we would say this person lives with schizophrenia. And so I think it would be beneficial for MHAP to have an agreement about what our language choices are and terminology that we're going to use. Whether we just kind of use the one pager that NAMI has established and then ratify it to suit our needs as this coalition, or come up with our own from scratch. But when we have multiple people speaking on behalf of one coalition, I think it's really important that we all are in alignment with what that terminology and language choices will be. It unifies us, it gets us all in the same mindset, and it also presents us in a professional way that is not increasing stigma when we're communicating with people who may be less familiar than we as individuals are.
I love that. Thank you so much, Bridget. And I am going to kick it to Matthew.
Oh, hi, everybody. Matthew Stanford, the Wisconsin Hospital Association. Actually, I wanted to kind of echo some of Kit Kirchensteiner's comments. I do think there's a little bit of a thought of, and I've seen this with other coalitions, where we can all end up spending a lot of time on trying to figure out the governance pieces. And I agree, we want to get to consensus, but with a group this big, getting absolute consensus, and when there's different priorities and everything else, becomes a challenge. And I do view the benefits of this group as we're bringing everybody together. We can all bring ideas together. And then we can all, as Kit mentioned, we have a lot of organizations on here, and then they can choose whether they want to sign on as their name. Is that ultimately more powerful to legislators and others in seeing those lists of folks, as opposed to, well, one name of MHAP, which are like, well, who's that? And so I do think it's worth thinking about, are we better off being more of a, I don't want to say loose coalition, it's not really, it's kind of a more of a decentralized model. We're all coming together as forums, sharing ideas. Somebody has an idea, call for, hey, are there other organizations or other folks in this call that want to sign on to this? I think that'd be easier than trying to figure out ahead of time, how do we want to come to we're all signing on the same thing as one thing. So I guess I would encourage kind of putting off the discussion until we're a little more mature of, do we want to act as an organization, or do we want to act as a forum of bringing ideas together?
I love that framing, Matthew, about it's kind of a fundamental framing. And I think it gets back to the, how moving forward it could be, and we could get to places that are intractable if we're working solely on consensus, and wanting to kind of respect that. How do we progress? I'm going to kick it to Leah, and then we're going to take a break.
Just a quick comment to that. I really agree with that completely. And I think one other thing that has come to mind, and I think aligns with what was just said, is that we're more powerful as this entity, right? And we all have relationships with other groups. So I think as part of this discussion, we talk about, how do we mobilize? How do we come together to address issues or to push legislation? Some of us can lobby, some of us can only educate, depending on our funding. And so I think as part of that whole governance and this whole conversation, that we also talk about, where are we the most, in what way are we the most powerful together? Whether it's just listing all of our names, or if it's just as the MHAP, working on my acronyms. So I wanted to throw the mobilization part in there too, because we are so much stronger together, and we all bring in additional relationships to get behind an issue, and we don't know where we're going to be facing in the future. So hopefully it's just a whole bunch of mental health funding, but we never know. So that's my last thought there.
Thank you, Leah. All right, we are scheduled to take a break. Lots of rich fodder for the governance group to talk about when we reconvene after the break. But we are on break. Do we come back at 10:30? Yes, Sita, Julia, I'm looking to you all.
Yes.
Yes.
Please come back at 10:30. Put your camera on so we know you're here. And we will ask Dr. Broadus to continue talking about ABHI, and then there will be some opportunities to ask questions at that point before we go turn over to the work groups. So we'll gather at 10:30 sharp. See you then. Welcome back, everybody. So you have heard a bit from Dr. Broadus earlier, but it's my pleasure now to introduce her in the context of the Advancing Behavioral Health Initiative, or ABHI. Dr. Michelle Broadus is an associate professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Medicine at the Medical College of Wisconsin, and she's also the principal investigator for ABHI, which is now in its final year. They've been doing this a long time. They've learned a lot. And we are delighted that she is also the principal investigator of a seed grant that MHAP has from Medical College of Wisconsin, from the Advancing Healthier Wisconsin Endowment, to nurture local coalitions, more local coalitions around the state. So our work is not only to come together as a coalition, but then we will also be nurturing additional coalitions and learning from the ABHI coalitions at the local level. So Michelle will give us an overview of ABHI and the bridge to our work. And if you have questions, there will be time for Q&A after her presentation. Michelle.
Thanks, Vita. Thanks again. For those of you just joining us, I am Michelle Broadus. And second, here we go. Delighted to meet you. I am in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Medicine, but I am not a psychiatrist. I am not a clinician. I am a researcher. Always have to say that. And it's my great privilege to give you a little bit more information about this project, which has been, I would say, the highlight of my entire career. So I have some slides to share. All right. So again, you saw the slide before, but just as a reminder, this was 8 years, 3 phases, a full year of learning and planning, 5 years for implementation, and then we are finishing up 2 years of what's been called sustainable transformation, which is really about making sure that all the great work that's been done is sustained in these communities. And again, just wanted to give you an overview of where these 10 coalitions are coming from. As you can see all across the state, a mix of urban, rural, as well as tribal communities. And this is a busy slide, but I have to say that this work was actually done not by me, of course, but by all the folks in what we call the learning community. One thing that has been particularly impactful is that AHW also hired a consultant, Paul Schmitz, to help us, especially in that first year and continuing into the other phases, to work on coalition building and things like having effective meetings and developing these relationships so that it truly does feel like a family. So I've listed out folks here with the notice that, whoops, many folks, this is not a comprehensive list of everyone. A lot of folks have been transitioning into new roles. So just to get a little bit more in detail, that phase 1, a lot of work was done in the first year to do needs assessments, gather data, do that coalition development. And as I said, the learning community was initiated and led by the independent facilitator. There were, in phase 2, 5 years, there was a wide variety of strategies. Each coalition really listened to their own communities and developed strategies in response to local needs. It was very focused on systems change. AHW didn't want to fund programs. They wanted to fund strategies. Strategies being things that attack systems level problems. And as I said, we are coming up on the end of our work. We're still in phase 3, again, ensuring that sustainability, dissemination of findings, and furthering the work of systems change. So overall lessons learned, I talked a little bit about this earlier this morning. Building coalitions takes time and intentionality, and you really have to be thinking about who's at the table. Some coalitions learned that there are some decisions and some meetings that some people need to come to and some where they don't. And specifically thinking about you needing to have buy-in from the folks at organizations that have the decision-making power to say, yes, we're going to adopt a new policy, we're going to adopt a new procedure, we're going to incorporate a new strategy into our workflows. But then you also have to have the folks that would actually be implementing it on the day-to-day level, those that actually know the context of implementing new policies, new strategies, how that's going to affect the day-to-day work of an organization. You have to have both. As I said, there have been quite a few folks that have transitioned away from our learning community and new folks coming on. And I think this goes back to what we're talking about this morning about ensuring durable communication channels, as well as for new members, a structured kind of orientation and onboarding process. We learned a lot about how to be very intentional about ensuring diversity. I think one of the most impactful experiences of the learning community has been visiting each of the 10 coalitions. And I think all of us would put our experience at the Lac du Flambeau tribal community at the top of a highlight of our time together. And at that visit, we learned about thinking about, do you need to be on the dance floor or should you be in the balcony? And when I say this, I mean, some folks are used to speaking. They are used to having their voice be heard. They have certain privileges, whether it's privileges based on race, ethnicity, their role, what institution they're from. People need to be aware of those. And sometimes folks that are used to being on the dance floor might need to take a step back and be on the balcony and let others speak. So I love that sort of metaphor, really being intentional about, is this a space where I need to be on the dance floor? Is this a space where I should be in the balcony? And again, the remarkable ability to build capacity to ensure a pipeline of leaders. I would say we always knew that this was going to be a phase 3 project, and that phase 3 was going to be about sustainability. But we didn't start talking about sustainability in phase 3. We started in phase 1. Think about sustainability early and often. And again, my tagline: relationships are an outcome. Building these relationships means benefits that we could never foresee. I know this is also a bit of a busy slide, but I wanted to give sort of an overview of some of the successful strategies that have been implemented so you can see the wide variety. Quite a few were, and I should say, these strategies may overlap. Some may be in multiple categories, and some have been adopted by multiple coalitions. But there is a group of school-based strategies about ACEs and resilience, social emotional learning, school-based mental health counseling in Marathon County, where they were able to embed therapists into schools and set up an entire process and workflow for maximizing benefit to the students. Implementing Sources of Strength, which is an evidence-based suicide prevention program in schools. And a lot of folks really dug into their YRBS data, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey data. Sorry, acronym knock there. The Youth Risk Behavior Survey data to drive decision making on what do we want to focus on when we decide on strategies. There's another section we call community-based strategies. The Catch Safety Plan. Oh, and there's another knock for me. That's the Schwamagon Accountable Community for Health. And they have instituted a program to be able to share safety plans amongst an entire array of organizations that is still HIPAA compliant, but includes things, folks like law enforcement, specifically to try to decrease the likelihood that interactions with law enforcement would lead to negative outcomes such as an emergency detention. So information that can be given to police officers at the moment of crisis to help the person experiencing the crisis reconnect, de-escalate, call upon their existing support system. The Lock to Flambeau coalition did an amazing program called Family Circles, aimed at mental health and AODA, acronym again, alcohol and other drug abuse. A traditional program that's culture is prevention. It was a program that existed, a few decades ago, but because of HW's funding was allowed to be revived. And it connects members of the communities within families to traditional practices, traditional language, and providing a safe space to talk about issues of substance use. And then another category, resources and access, including an early autism evaluation program in the Next Step Clinic, creating a resilient and trauma-informed community, and being able to provide screening and mental health resources at sort of a one-stop shop that's very powerful online tool to help people get connected to the resources that they need. Go. Next. I want to give a shout out to what's something that we're very excited that is coming soon in just a few weeks, the ABHI Strategy Guide. And this sort of represents a compendium of everything that we have learned at the local level, at the coalition level, at the state level, summarizing 8 years of the work that's been done, including practicable suggestions and actionable insights, all in the mission of furthering awareness and reducing stigma and really driving us forward to create more sustainable change. So again, that's the ABHA Strategy Guide. We will be launching soon, so I will be sending out the link to that strategy guide when it is available. We're very excited about it and hope that you will take some time to dig into that because it will give a lot more information than I can possibly give at this in this opportunity, in this time. And I will say there's a lot of opportunities to build upon the strategy guide based on, how the kinds of resources that MHAP would like to see brought to a wider community. Sina, we were also asked to talk about some themes of broader challenges that still exist at a more statewide level. So this comes from discussions across time with the ABHI of what the learning community has seen as the remaining challenges. And we've come up with a few that I think very well overlap with some of MHAP's analysis of both low-hanging fruit and long-term things we should tackle. Insurance being right up there in the top. Licensure, how do we support people getting enough training hours, making sure that they can get licensed in a timely way. Focusing in schools, how do we embed curricula? How do we support the DPI curriculum, social emotional learning, things like teen first aid, mental health first aid? A lot of training was done by various coalitions, and the feeling was that training opportunities were a little scattered. So the idea of there being some sort of a clearinghouse for folks of all sorts of professions or interests, even to get more training in areas of behavioral health, whether you're, professional, law enforcement, and embedding trained trainers in communities for more sustainability. And then finally, thinking about how data can move things forward as well. You can't get a grant without data, and usually you can't, advocate for a policy decision without the data that back it up. That includes, wire BS data, referral systems that people use, public health, and how to manage services and crisis plans. I'm going to end in a second because I want to I have time for people to ask questions, but I want to personally invite everyone. We're going to be doing a learning session to do more of a deep dive on the ABHI March 15th in the afternoon. You don't need to worry about writing that down right now. There will be an invite going out. And at that meeting, there'll be more of the ABHI members in attendance. Some, unfortunately, we're not able to make it today, but we will be providing an overview of the strategy guide and how it might be helpful to you and your community. You'll have the opportunity to hear directly more from the coalition staff about their local projects and, explore more deeply into those lessons learned. And in my mind, I feel like there is a direct bridge that we can build from the ABHI to the MHAP. And I would love for discussion about that at this meeting, not just from the ABHI members, but from all of you. What do you see that we can, what do you see that's particularly impactful or speaks to you from the work that's been done on the ABHI? And then move that, whether it be a policy level discussion or practice or some other sorts of ways of systems change to create the bridge between the great work that's been done across the state and what we're trying to do here with this group. So that's slides. And so I will just pause for a moment to field questions.
Mark, go ahead.
So thank you for your wonderful work. And I think there's quite a bit of the action plans you've worked on that would be great for MHAP to take up. And I noted a few of them that I definitely think we should take up. One of the questions I have, which I think would also apply to MHAP, would be how did you, what efforts did you do, or how did you reach out to the Latino Hispanic community in terms of meeting the needs of immigrant and monolingual Spanish speaking clients throughout the state, and also in terms of the African American community in the state? I do see that you did work with the tribes, which is fantastic, but I was wondering, those other groups, not necessarily represented today as much here, but how did you reach out to them and involve them and make sure that their needs were part of your work plan?
Thank you so much for that question. I hate to do this, but the real experts are not me. Christy, do you have your hand up because you'd like to speak to the first question about the Latino population?
I do. I'm sorry, I don't have my camera's not working. So my coalition is in Southwest Wisconsin, and we are a member of Southwest Community Action Program. We partnered with a group that was already here called the Multicultural Outreach Program. Since then, they have become part of our Southwest CAP family, and they strictly work with Spanish-speaking people in Southwest Wisconsin. So we are a 5-county region with my coalition. We reached out to them because they were already doing the work. They already had connections with the schools, with the family resource centers in our area. They had connections with the Spanish-speaking provider that we have within our 5 counties. And so instead of trying to create something new, we pulled them in and worked with them and listened to what their needs were, to what their clients' needs were, and just partnered with them because we didn't want to start something completely from scratch because we don't have time to do that, right? And they're already there. They already had the resource knowledge available to us, and they are, I would say, 2 people with they're the content experts, I would say. And so we really relied heavily on them to give us the information that we needed.
And Leah.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. That is that's a great example.
of how to do this kind of work. We were working on addressing issues around kids 0 to 8, and so we had and we're also City of Milwaukee. So what I was able to do in the phase 1 that first year was meet with a slew. I think I had 80 one-on-ones in the first 6 months of my work with this project, and I went directly to leaders in the community and proxies for those who are already doing the work in our community to really talk to them. And then because also we weren't allowed to do focus groups or anything like that initially without an institutional review board, the IRB approval. So we called them proxy interviews, and that actually really helped us inform what we were going to be doing. And it also opened us up to really wanting to focus on the work that community health workers are doing in Milwaukee, the promotoras, and who are really, really close to the microcosms in the Milwaukee community, and work to convene community health workers who were meeting families where they're at. They're working with refugees. We also had the Milwaukee Muslim Women's Coalition, who were original members. And so we worked very closely with different faith groups as well. So we just kind of covered all the bases that at first year when we were figuring out where were those disparities and what would be some innovative ways to address them, but then also to maintain those relationships. I have been consistently attending the meetings that they're having as well. So like showing up and being present, having your face, not talking the whole time, but like just being there and showing that you're interested, that you're engaged, that you care, and really building that trust made a huge difference as well.
I love that. Thank you, Leah. I think we're transitioning. Am I correct, Sita, that we're moving forward from here? And here's what I want to say about that wonderful sharing from all of our partners at ABHI and all of you that have done such rich and amazing work in your local coalitions. I think that the bit that was shared with us here this morning is just a taste of some things that they can share with us in the March session. And I hope it amplifies the value that we hope moves through as we get into different learning sessions. We're all touching different parts of these systems and have those differing perspectives and knowledge to bring forward. I know that I've already made some great new network-based connections through this work that have helped me see some of the pieces of the work that I've been in for many, many years here through our association, but see it through a new lens. And I think that that's a huge piece of value that we derive from having these collective opportunities to gather and learn and hear from one another and all of the rich things that are happening within our local communities. So I am taking us up to the public policy level. That's the next step in the conversation that we have in our agenda here today. So we want to kind of put ourselves within this timeline context of where we operate on this state policy level and where we're at within the agenda of our state legislature, the calendar of our state legislature, and where we might have and see and identify, again, within the context of our work groups and some of our collective work where there's opportunities. So for those of you that touch this work directly day by day, you know this well. And then there's a lot of you folks that this is not your world, your scope of your world on a day-to-day basis is what's happening at the state legislature. Well, the legislative session is going to be ending soon. And then the 2025 session is yet a year away, but we have a closure of a session that we're anticipating within the next few weeks here. By mid-March, likely both the Senate and the Assembly will have adjourned. And then we have in the middle of that, a slide that's before you right now, which is that we're in the midst now of moving into the biennial budget process. So so much, and many of you, as you've had the opportunity to advocate and activate within your local communities and coalitions, certainly have participated in that biennial budget process through hearings, maybe in your local communities before the Joint Committee on Finance, but that you know that this is a big piece. This is a huge building block for how our state functions on a biennial basis, that we need that these resources get renewed, that we have an opportunity again to come together and talk about what our shared priorities are as a state, and that's the budget process. So we're going to talk a little bit, so like to understand that if you're in a work group that is identifying some low-hanging fruit, right? We got to hear from ABHI around some of the pieces that they identified, that they looked at and said, we're doing good work, but here's some systemic barriers that we're experiencing around insurance, around workforce, that if there is some low-hanging fruit here that we want to be about collectively together, want to be informing and learning from each other about, that this is our time frame. So we know that we would like to, and so our low-hanging fruit opportunity lies in perhaps by May being able to, and at our May summit, being able to identify out of our work groups some priorities, some initiatives that we think might be ripe, might be ready for us to say that there's an MHAP view of where we should be prioritizing. So again, on the timeline here, you'll see that we're in January, at the very end of January, and state agencies are in the process right now. So Department of Health Services, Department of Children and Families, and Public Instruction, they're all thinking about what's going to happen in the next biennium, in the next 2025 legislature, and when the budget session starts next June. When the budget session ends next June. So they're in the process of putting things together and recommendations. They'll be doing some listening sessions and engaging of their stakeholder groups over the course of the next few months. So really that April, May timeframe that they're processing through, meeting with different groups to assess what is it that the priorities that we're seeing lying ahead. That gets pulled back in, reassessed by the departments, and then they have to submit their budget requests, so their priority requests, to the Department of Administration by September. And then the governor takes those and incorporates all of those items through his administration, through his decision making up at the governor's level for introduction of his budget in February. So that's sort of the process. The budget gets introduced in February of 2025, and then we're off to the races with the state legislature, taking it on, moving through their hearings with a final budget for us in the middle of 2025 in June, ideally. So examples of low-hanging fruit that we're hoping to just throw out for all of you today. Increasing Medicaid rates to cover the cost of care. Ongoing piece of advocacy that many of us are about, many of us have been about, and certainly emerging again with those ABHI discussions, that we know Medicaid rates is a piece. There may be some other pieces that we know from our core group having talked, and from our summit that emerged, our October summit that emerged. So other examples, full state funding related again to Medicaid, full state funding for the community support program. There were a group of us that signed on to a supportive letter for full funding for CSP in the last budget cycle. It did not make it through, but that may be an area that there would be some resonance with people on. As we look at other items, so evidence-based practice, so thinking about full fidelity and support for dialectical behavior therapy. There's been an active group that's been pushing for figuring out how we spread the practice, how we make it and build it into our system so that it's a fully reimbursable, supported, evidence-based practice within our state. Other ideas, sort of thinking about Medicaid more generally, so it's something the Medicaid group could work on, is looking at our current Medicaid structure and our HMOs, and talking about how we use the contracting system with our HMOs to hold more accountability around mental health access. What do our networks look like? Do we have sufficiency within our networks? How do we better think about leveraging on those contracts? So for some of you, maybe this feels like a little bit in the weeds, around a policy and funding discussions. And for some of the rest of you, you may be saying, let's go. We wanted to get on this yesterday. And we know that all of you bring a perspective and expertise to the conversations we're going to move into. So I am going to, with that sort of framing of where we see timelines lining up, thinking about that we'll have another summit in May, that maybe we're in a position where some work group key discussions have bubbled up to the point where we can say some things about where directionally we see value within the next budget process. With that kind of framework in mind, I'm going to kick it back over to Sita so she can talk to you a little bit more about the work groups, and then we'll make some choices about going actually into work group for further conversation this morning.
Thanks, Kathy. So in a moment, you'll get a chance to choose which work group you'd like to join today. And they're on the slide, as Kathy says. So pick one for today, although if you can't choose and you want to participate in more than one, you're welcome to participate in like 2 or even 3, but please keep in mind what Kit said. You know, if we commit to a work group, we all want to be workhorses in that work group. We want to work pulled together. Each group today has a facilitator and a scribe who are going to serve for this meeting. And one of your tasks during the meeting is to choose facilitators and scribes for the next few meetings. So it's not like somebody is signing on forever and ever. And the facilitators and scribes who are serving today may be okay with continuing on, but make sure that you don't walk out of that meeting, that what you do today chooses a facilitator and a scribe for next time, and that you schedule your next meeting. Will be purchasing a Zoom account for MHAP, and Julia and I will keep a list of work group meetings just to coordinate schedules and support the facilitators, making sure that you have the materials you need, making sure that your messages get out to MHAP and to the people in the work group. But we will also send some of those work group messages out to everybody, because we know that there may be people who haven't had a chance to choose a work group, or who are new and want to choose a work group, or somebody who may want to come in on more than one. So each work group will set its own pace and schedule depending on their scope and deliverables. But again, you know, we're going to keep up a pretty good pace here. We're going to move at the speed of trust. I absolutely love that. But we also want to be action oriented. Action is in our name, and that's really what we're about. So you can have 40 minutes today to introduce yourselves, review the proposed charge and deliverables, and then set the next meeting and decide how often you'll meet. Most of the time today will be spent discussing the charge and the deliverables, well, introducing yourselves and discussing the charge and the deliverables, and deciding on who's going to take on various tasks and how to stay coordinated. And in the future, we hope you'll develop a logic model and other materials that will help the coalition understand, the partnership understand kind of at a high level what you want to achieve, you know, where you think that we as a partnership should be going. So in the spirit of coalition work, we hope for an active discussion today among as many people in the room as possible. And then Bryn will send a message at 5 minutes before the work group closes. And at that point, please choose a few points to report to the main group. So in a moment, we will open the breakout rooms. You'll get an opportunity to choose which breakout room, which work group you want to choose for today. And again, you'll have 40 minutes. And then I'll ask Renee to facilitate a conversation on the report out.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm tasked with the report out. I'm happy to report out that the data work group got nothing done because there weren't any participants. So that's all we can, no, I'm just kidding. But unfortunately, we didn't have any participants in the data work group, and maybe we're hoping that down the line, we might get more interested in data once we have sort of more of our charter and governance and those things sort of figured out on where to go and what data to look at, because that's certainly a big topic. So we have about 5 minutes to report out from each group. I thought we would go in alphabetical order by simplicity. So that's why I started with data. But how about the diversity, equity, and inclusion work group? If the scribe or other members want to jump in and report out.
Do you want to take that?
Oh, go ahead, Rick.
Well, I'll try to do a quick summary. Beyond a great introduction to each other, there was an amazing number of recommendations for groups to invite. And our practice has been, or the core group practice has been, to engage with stakeholders, to really listen, and then invite them. So there will be quite a bit of work before our next scheduled meeting on the afternoon of February 16th, and looking forward to meet monthly. We did not get in, well, there was a few who wisely and bravely gave us some priorities, but the vast majority of the discussion was on who would be appropriate for this group. But we look forward to getting into learning top priorities so that we can see how much we have in common.
And just the logistical piece, our next meeting is Friday, February 16th at 2 o'clock. But going forward after that, our meetings will be Friday, the first Friday of the month at 1 o'clock, and we'll meet by Zoom. Anybody else is invited. And we want to have bridges between the DEI work group and all of the other work group, because that's essential.
Great, Sita and Rick, thank you for sharing that. How about a report out from the governance work group?
Well, we had a tough time of coming up with the governance, and a lot of the commentary was about, going back to really having a deliberation of what this MHAP's role is going to be, and how we're going to relate to other constituencies and coalitions that are plentiful around the state, ranging from particular groups around like WICSA, or what the relationship would be with the Mental Health Council, with the department, how we make decisions. So there's a lot of work to be deliberated on, but one of the things that came out of our governance work group was maybe having a facilitated session to really kind of help focus our efforts, and also to perhaps earlier on invite one of the participants from the Minnesota initiative to give us some additional guidance of things that we could learn from them, so we don't repeat similar mistakes, and we take the opportunities that they've seized. We also talked about potentially deliberating on exactly whether we're more of a informational sharing group, or how we actually interact with these other stakeholders, and the way we do membership. So we really didn't answer a lot of questions. We had established that we're going to try to meet on the 21st for our next meeting. The frequency of the meetings for the governance work group was not decided. We're trying to work back from that May date for giving a proposal. So we don't want to overly tax our group. So biweekly was thought like a pretty intense ask from the governance work group people. So maybe every 3 weeks was the time that we heard. And there were, I was fortunate to have Lisa step up and offer to do the scribe activity. But looks like I am de facto the facilitator for that group initially. So And we're going to have a doodle poll exactly what time we're going to meet. It sounds like the afternoon, maybe on the 21st would be the most optimal time.
Great, thanks, Brad.
But-
We'll pass. Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask my scribe, Stacy, if she had anything she wanted to add, or any of the other group members.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
All right, how about the Medicaid work group?
Okay, we had your data people in our work group, Renee. So we need more information in the Medicaid work group. We had a really good array of folks that joined our work group. I will say that in terms of the number of discussion topics, right? It's not just a question of sort of inequity and sort of what's available from a Medicaid programming perspective around the state, but also that reimbursement structure and thinking about rates and where they sit. We had conversation about having that, thinking about as we study what's that question of the Medicaid disparities, Medicaid eligible accessible programs across the state on a county by county basis or regionalized basis, that we're not just focalizing on Dane and Milwaukee, but really thinking about where the gaps are in our rural communities and other parts of the state where maybe people don't even have CCS at this point. And so not losing touch with that as we think about advancing in towards other reimbursements, other opportunities, whether it be DBT, other evidence-based practices. I think we wanted to do sort of a scan, and I think our next meeting will focus on what is it that's sort of in that low-hanging fruit space right now. So we've identified a couple of pieces with the community support program that there had been some resonance around with looking at funding for DBT and wanting to understand what's been happening in the work and the groundwork that's been laid there, but then also thinking about clubhouses, right? And thinking about other things that have come to the fore. We've had a lot of good energy, I would say, at the Capitol around moving forward on some Medicaid funded programming and in crisis as well, right? Some of these areas, but some of these have not had dollars attached to them, have not really been thinking through sort of the impact on the funding side and really putting together the right kind of financial structure that would allow for really lifting up some of these services that we know that work. I mean, that was another big piece that came through our conversation. So I think we'll be thinking about getting all of our hands on sort of what are those pieces that people have been actively working on in the Medicaid space to have a better sense of that. I think we're again going to look at some of those cross-border issues where we're not being able to be competitive, or we're not, because we've got workforce that are able to go over to Minnesota, for example, and the reimbursement structures are so much better over there compared to where we are in Wisconsin. So that was another piece that came to the fore. I have a facilitator fail, and then I didn't get our group landed on a date for our next meeting. So we'll need to do a doodle poll to get out. But I certainly felt like there was good energy within our group for wanting to gather again. And so we will be pulling that group together and setting that next meeting date. And I think, again, another big piece for us to talk about early on is data, and thinking about where we've had kind of good buckets of information and data, particularly around our Medicaid reimbursement systems, and what we need to be gathering and tapping into our state partners for that information. Other people from our group have other things they want to jump in with, or Julia, anything else?
Oh, I would like to jump in if that's okay. Did you say you also wanted to, you felt uncomfortable with the mental health being set up the long-term program?
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit on me, Adam, but I believe you're referencing the conversation we had around IDD and mental health being separate, or needing to qualify in for programs under IDD when you have mental health needs also, and that we have our funding streams that really channel people into those specific Medicaid services instead of taking a more holistic look at what the complexity is for the individual. So that disconnect that we have, which some of which, as you identified, Adam, coming down to us from the federal level, some of which is about how we're choosing to structure things programmatically here. And we have some more flexibility perhaps under federal structures to structure it a little bit differently than we've chosen to in the state so far.
Great points. And thank you for that acronym push there. Yes, intellectual disability.
And developmental disability, yes.
Yeah, and Dr. Alvarez put in the chat, which I agree, the importance of reimbursing integrated behavioral health appropriately with Medicaid population for health systems is a really important factor in access to care and recovery, certainly. Any other Medicaid comments from the audience? The group? All right. And our last group is the workforce work group.
I think Kathy and I are tag teaming report out. I will say though, we had the data focus in our group too, Renee. So part of understanding or addressing our workforce shortage is understanding what exactly that looks like, and also what need looks like throughout our state, including in various communities, both from kind of a race or ethnic lens, from a disability lens, and from even like a rural urban lens. So lots of data that we feel like we need to inform building out the workforce to address our need. The other piece I will say, so we did commit to meeting every other Friday, beginning on Friday, February 23rd at 2 p.m. That will be subject to change, I think, depending on what we end up learning in our first few meetings. And also kind of timeline, I will say, for when our overarching deliverables, like we need to have some pieces of information in place by the May summit, I'm assuming, but kind of I need to revisit with the core group exactly what the expectations are there, because I've missed some meetings, so my apologies. We had lots of good conversation also about incentivizing the various portions of our workforce and focusing in on again on peers and other folks that are maybe not formally licensed but have some sort of a certification or providing you know, some sort of additional services in that bucket. And Kathy, I'm going to kick it over to you because you have the notes and I feel like are probably better positioned.
Well, I can add a few things. Emily graciously agreed to continue to be the facilitator, but yes, we talked about kind of the need to consider the entire breadth of continuum of care, increasing opportunity and incentives for people with diverse backgrounds to enter the mental health professional field and supporting them on their journey, whether that's in graduate school or completing the licensing exams or and the programs that are able to hire and support the growing workforce. The data, yes, we need to be able to speak to that and define what that shortage is, what the need is, and again, across the continuum of providers, whether that's peer support, recovery coaches, nurses, MSWs, LPCs, et cetera. So, I don't know, anything else? Lots of good discussion about the QTT and successes that we're seeing and the need to expand that and continue to support that, both for the trainees and for the agencies that can hire and support people.
Sounds like a great meeting for all the work groups today. So thanks everyone very much. I'll pass it back to Sita. Sita wants to add. I'll be quiet.
I'd like to pass it to Matthew for a second because he and I had a very interesting conversation last week about that walks the bridge between Medicaid and the workforce about burden and making better use of Medicaid dollar by streamlining documentation burden.
Yeah, again, and I think what you're alluding to, Sid, is that, and I think both the two groups from the report outs kind of recognize as well that interplay between Medicaid payment in workforce and the regulatory environment, and they're all kind of interrelated. So, and I'm sure that'll be on the forefront of both of those groups. I think, is that what you were kind of alluding to, Sita?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, the time spent documentation takes away from the value of the Medicaid dollar or the insurance dollar. You know, we do have to have evidence-based practice, and we do have to have outcomes, but making it as streamlined as possible, number one, makes use of the public dollar better, and number two, allows people to get on with the work that they wanted to do, the work of healing and helping people regain balance. And so it's more satisfying for the workforce. So it's kind of a, hits both prongs.
And if I could just add to that, the other issue that we have is we do not have consensus about what good documentation looks like. So the risk with that is huge, because if we ever did have a Medicaid audit in the state of Wisconsin, we don't have consensus on that. We don't have clear direction from the state administrative bodies. I think we would have all sorts of variation, and we would have paybacks, which would hurt the very people we're trying to serve in every agency.
Oh, go ahead, Jessica. Sorry, see your hands up.
This conversation is reminding me that the Children Come First Advisory Committee and the subgroups that are working on the children's system of care, they have 5 work groups, and some of this is certainly going to intersect. So keeping them in mind and keeping tabs on their efforts for systems change and alignment, I think would be good for this group. They've certainly been looking on, and perfect, yeah. That streamlining of contracting and paperwork and processing as well. So, and thanks, Emily. Yeah, we've got representation.
Any other thoughts or comments on that before we move on? All right, everybody. So thank you very much for that robust discussion. That's just the thin edge of the wedge. We have a lot more to do over the years, but I feel very hopeful about this. I think that we have our, fingers where we need to have our fingers, and we're in a good place to begin doing this work. So thank you. And I think, coalitions of coalitions, the more we can kind of bring ourselves to these other coalitions and bring these other coalitions to us, and also in terms of reaching out to the populations who need to be here, going there and listening is the very first step. And so, all of us going out and just kind of keeping MHAP in our mind as we go out and do all of our networking and going, oh, you might enjoy this, come to a learning session or come to the MHAP meeting, just contact Sita and Julia. So that's my segue into talking about the learning sessions. Part of MHAP's work is to learn what we need to know, collaborate effectively, and we have a lot to learn from each other and from outside experts, both experts with lived experience and experts with learned experience. I'm going to take that up, Michelle. So we're hosting online learning sessions monthly, except in the months when there's an MHAP summit. So we will not have one in May. We will have one in February, March, and April. And then we'll skip May, and then we'll go to June, and then we'll skip July, but anyway, you get the idea. It's a nice way to round out your week. So these will be on Fridays from 2:30 to 4 p.m. They will all be virtual. Just tune in on us as you're kind of closing things down, but also prepare to engage, because like the December learning session, we will generally have brief presentations, and then we will divide into breakout groups to kind of chew on the information and then come back and report out to each other on how this informs our work going forward. If you'd like, that we did record the December learning session, which was on previous reform efforts, specifically the Governor's Blue Ribbon Commission on Mental Health, where Diane Greenlee spoke about what the commission did, and also kind of the birth of the peer recovery movement, not movement, but peer recovery entry into services in the Wisconsin system. And then Heidi Pankow talked about the 2009 very detailed analysis of the role of Medicaid in mental health and substance use services in Wisconsin. So that recording is available and all those materials are available. We'll figure out where we can get a repository, a central repository for all of this material. But in the meantime, if you want it, contact Julia. So the next 2 learning sessions are set. We're delighted on February 9th to be focusing on innovations in building the mental health workforce. We're very pleased to have Jessica Smith's colleague Ben Montpierre from the UW Whitewater CT program to talk about the Qualified Treatment Trainee Program. And that has come up several times this morning. So we will dive deeper into QTP, what it is, how to keep it going, the various iterations of QTP. And then Joellen Steele from the Lake Superior Community Health Center, which is an FQHC, will discuss workforce challenges in a border community. Many of you will relate to that. We've got a lot of borders in Wisconsin. And then we have invited someone from Children's Wisconsin to talk about their hospital initiatives to build their mental health workforce. And we're hoping to hear back there. So we will probably have 3 speakers. Again, we will have opportunity to chew on that in small groups and then reflect as a whole group. So I'm going to put the registration link in the chat unless Julia has done it already. And so feel free, that will be again, February 9th. Thank you, Julia. Friday, February 9th at 2:30. And then the learning session after that will be March 15th, also Friday, also at 2:30. And that is when Michelle and the ABHI coalition colleagues will go into more depth on the ABHI initiative. We'll get to hear from local coalition stakeholders, and I hope at that point they will have launched their strategy guide and we can take a little walk through that. And so Julia is putting the registration link for that there too. So please do join us. But that said, we also want to brainstorm other possible learning session topics. We just heard yesterday from Dr. Abra Vigna, who did the 2019 GAPS report that focused on disparities in mental health care in Wisconsin. And she has agreed to join us on April 19th. So that one is starting to take place. We want to have a panel of diverse stakeholders to discuss the implementation of those, where we are, what's happened since 2019. We had a pandemic, but what else? And what are the implications for our work as MHAP? So invite people to both of these sessions. Please feel free to invite people who you think might be interested, whether they're interested in MHAP as a whole or not. And so then here are some other things that we have talked about: Medicaid rate reform, issues and effective strategies, and maybe the Medicaid work group wants to take this up and frame this learning session. Best practices in system reform generally. What have other states done, especially county-based states? Let's look at what they've done, what succeeded, where they moved the dial, where they didn't, the context in which they worked, and compare it to the context in which we work. Evidence-based practices in mental health, how to get those into the water in a mental health system, how to get everybody trained, how to hold everybody accountable, how to measure the outcomes for evidence-based practice, and how to strengthen those evidence-based practices, even in areas where they may be more difficult to implement, or with populations with whom they may need to be adapted in order to make sense. Another one is integrated mental health, substance use, and primary care. We know that we've got the FQHCs on board with us here, with the Wisconsin Primary Healthcare Association and with the Association of Free and Charitable Clinics. They do integrated care. Many of you probably do too, and or participate in integrated care. But there are some really exciting things going on that we should scale up around Wisconsin. And then last but not least, this prickly thing called Chapter 51 history. and implications for financing and service delivery. So those are our ideas, and we'll take the slide down and brainstorm from you all. What else do you think we need to have on the agenda? And we'll put out a poll. You know, once we get all of this pulled together, we'll put out a survey and ask you all to choose what you think we should focus on for the learning sessions. So anybody, what ideas do you have?
Peter, following up with our discussion during the meeting, maybe some topic related to the state of mental health among minority communities or underserved communities.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a focus of the April 19th learning session, but we will probably need to dig deeper. So, you know, that'll be kind of a broad stroke, but then dig deeper perhaps into communities where English is a second language, or you know, specific communities or new Americans, you know, so we may need to do some follow-up DEI. Bruce, go ahead.
I don't know if this would be possible at all, but it might be interesting to have some kind of discussion of the unwinding of the mental health system in Dane County from the 1970s until the present, where the number of services has just been in a long, slow decline.
Well, I think Dane County isn't in the whole alone in among counties that have experienced a long, slow decline, but Dane County was at one point at the top of the heap in the nation, and things have certainly deteriorated since then. So maybe it sounds a little depressing, but look at what contributed, maybe Dane County as a case example, and what contributes to this kind of fragmentation, and how to heal the fragmentation, and how to get back on the beam to delivering excellent care to everybody. Yeah, it's a good suggestion. Other thoughts?
I think there'd be a lot of interest around Medicaid. You know one person could probably do that justice. I don't know if you could do it in an hour, but I think understanding the varying threads of funding and those opportunities is going to be key for all of our groups.
Yeah, so we will probably have to have several learning sessions on Medicaid. And as I said, this is the beginning. This is our first year, so we may have to look back to Medicaid on like every 6 months, you know, and whatever else emerges. I mean, you know, I have been in the system since before the Affordable Care Act, so you know that's a whole new player in the mental health space, and we can look at Affordable Care Act plans and how they do and don't serve the populations, and the churn and Medicaid expansion, you know, and all of that sort of thing. So that's an excellent thought for a learning session. Other thoughts? These are great, folks.
I don't want to put Mary Beth on the spot, but I feel like she could teach us a thing or two about mental health, healthcare integration, a kind of across the lifespan, and that might be broadening your scope, Mary Beth, but that's kind of what I was hearing in our conversation.
Yeah, happy to talk about sort of models of care and where the evidence lies, and sort of just get this group sort of up to speed on what's happening in the sort of medical spaces to provide high quality behavioral health
across the lifespan. Wonderful. Yeah, well, so that leads us to learning sessions on what's happening in kid mental health, what's happening in elder mental health, the growing population as a member of the Silver Tsunami myself. You know, what's happening now that we're all aging into various things, including disability. Yeah. Matthew, go ahead.
One other one, especially since we didn't have any participation on the data group today. I think one might be interesting of various groups, what data we do have, and just kind of walking through the data that exists. I know we have quite a bit, even publicly available on our website. Can walk through that. I think the counties have some other pieces. That's part of it. We've got some different disparate groups of data buckets, and that might be a good learning session across the board.
Yeah, that would be an excellent learning session, and there are even ways to make it so it's not, doesn't make your eyes glaze over. So we've got some people who can speak in compelling ways about the data and can present it, you know, kind of crisply in like, this is why we need it, this is what we have, this is what we don't have, you know, this is how to use it, that kind of thing. Excellent idea. Last call, everybody. Okay, well, thank you very much. This has really been a wonderful, rich meeting from my perspective. I hope that it's been worth your time. And one of the principles in MHAP is, you know, to give us as much time as you can, and as much effort as you can. Don't feel bad about not giving more, but just, you know, bring your best to each of our meetings. And so, thank you. So, if there are other people who you think would bring value to our work, please introduce them to Julia and me. We'll send out, we've got a little, you know, this is MHAP kind of introduction, and we can give them links so that they can look at the recording or listen to the recording from today or look at our summaries. And one more thing before we go to the evaluation. We have funding, NAMI Wisconsin has funding for MHAP for this calendar year. We applied for a couple of longer grants from AHW and the UW Impact Partnership, respectively, and then again, we might go back to UW, but if you can think of funding sources, even national funding sources, and if you could make an introduction to us to national funding sources who are interested in systems change, please connect Julia and me with them, and we will explore the possibilities for long-term funding. I know the governance work group might think about contribution from MHAP members that have a budget, you know, versus those that don't, and, you know, sliding fee scale going forward. But we do need to think about financial sustainability for the future. So now is a good time to start thinking about that. And just send your ideas to Julia and me. And so Julia is going to put our evaluation link in the chat. Please do give us your full and honest evaluation. We do use this. We look at it, the core group looks at all of this stuff and thinks about, you know, your feedback and your thoughts as we plan our way forward. So with that, I'll just open it up. Well, you can see the evaluation there. Any final comments before we close? Everybody's busy completing their evaluation. Good for you. If you have any thoughts after the meeting, please email Julia and me. We'll bring them up with the core group. If you would like to serve on the core group and you're up for meeting at the crack of dawn every other Monday morning, we would love to have you. It's a very much a rubber meets the road kind of working group. Of smart, wonderful people, I'm just saying. Okay, everyone. Well, with that, I think we will adjourn. Be well, do good work, keep in touch, like Garrison Keeler says, and we'll see you at the learning session on February 9th going forward, and we hope to see you in person May 15th, somewhere in Wisconsin. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.